We're with Arno Niemand, who received the Order of Merit this weekend from the Wrestling Hall of Fame. Arno, could you talk a little bit about how you got involved in the sport of wrestling?
Well, actually, it started when I was about 14 years old, and I was at Mercersburg Academy in Pennsylvania, and trying to find a sport that I could compete in, as I was singularly inept at anything to do with balls. My house master, who happened to be the wrestling coach, suggested that since I only weighed 120 pounds that I might try wrestling. And that's how I got started, actually. I paid my dues in the room, as most young guys do, and I've been active in the sport ever since.
Tell us about the decision to go to Cornell and about wrestling experience at that university.
Sure. Well, I graduated from high school in 1952, and I was looking around for a school, an Ivy League school that had a good wrestling team, and someone suggested that I apply to Cornell. I really hadn't thought about it much, and I sent my application in. I was fortunate enough to be accepted, and I wrestled there under Jimmy Miller, who was the coach at the time.
Yeah, and you were on some pretty good teams at the time?
Well, I came in as a freshman on the 1953 team, which was second in the East and third in the NCAAs, and that was about on peak for a number of years. Cornell then had some stronger teams in the late 50s and early 60s.
So, finished with college, but stayed involved in the sport of wrestling. Tell us a little bit about how the sport kept you around and why you have a passion for it.
Well, I lived in New York City, and I belonged to the New York Athletic Club, and of course I followed the wrestling there to a certain extent, and then eventually drifted back to supporting Cornell University wrestling. I got pretty heavily involved with that, and was helpful with a number of other people in bringing that program back up to a national caliber level. Also, I started a company called Body Bar Systems, which is a fitness product, a weighted fitness bar, and it took me into the health club area. And then USA Wrestling would ask me for some support and I asked them where they needed it the most, and they said that they didn't have any sponsors for the women's program. And so I said I thought that would be a good fit for us, since our product was primarily a women's product used in aerobic studios. So I'm very pleased with the way the women's program has developed in Colorado Springs and elsewhere.
And you take some pride when you see successes of our women athletes, such as our world champ Clarissa Chan or Olympic medalist Randy Miller, and how the young women are doing with the U.S. program at this point?
Absolutely. I think starting with, of course, the Billie Jean King of women's wrestling, in my opinion, is Trish Saunders, starting with her, and then going on to Patricia Miranda, whose credentials are impeccable, and then on through to Clarissa. I think it's just marvelous to watch these young women progress in the sport, and it certainly is competitive at the international level with the Japanese and the Russians and so on.
Talk a little bit about the strength of the program at Cornell now. I know that they had a very strong team this year and were nationally competitive all season long. Everyone expected great things from the team, and in the day that may not have been expected from a team in the Ivy League competing against programs that are fully scholarshiped and have a lot of other advantages.
Well, we've come a long way. This sort of standing joke amongst Cornellians is that we're kind of an overnight sensation, 30 years in the making. We worked a long time on this to bring this all back into focus, and we were very fortunate in having really a sympathetic president and a sympathetic athletic director, as well as an outstanding coach. And of course, it didn't hurt any that we got this freestanding facility, which we think is one of the best in the country, along with two-time national champion Travis Lee, which gave us a lot of national exposure. Young kids really respond to that kind of thing. And we have outstanding assistant coaches as well. And we think that's all part of a piece. And of course, we've tried to endow most of our programs so that it's not susceptible so much to the whims of the budgetary whims. Andy Grove, the former chairman of Intel, stated at one point that only the paranoid survive, and I think that this is true in wrestling in spades, and you really got to make sure that your program is strong and that your conference is strong, otherwise you might not be around very long.
Now, you've done a little bit of writing about the sport of wrestling. Tell us a little bit about the experience of putting down some of the history of wrestling.
Well, I'm very intrigued with this post-war period, particularly between 1946, when the NCAA wrestling started up again, through about the early 50s, when the pendulum swung essentially from the domination of Oklahoma to some great Iowa teams, which were led by tiny Cornell College and Iowa Teachers College, very strong teams that they had. And they had, of course, outstanding coaches in Paul Scott and Dave McCuskey, and some of the greatest wrestlers in the history of the sport participated during that period. Of course, this period is informed by the Great Depression and World War II, and the GI Bill plays heavily into it. In the 50s, of course, the big schools took over, and now in Iowa, of course, Iowa and Iowa State are the big rivals. But in those days, it was actually Cornell College and Iowa Teachers College that had the really outstanding programs.
Now, your involvement with USA Wrestling led to you receiving a Fila Gold Star at the Pan Am Championships a year or so ago. Tell me your thoughts about your involvement with international wrestling and you know how the sport has a standing on the world level.
Well, I'm very pleased to be involved with, and to be honest with you, my focus had not been so much on freestyle, but when getting involved with the women's program, I really had to focus on it, and I think that I can see where we've made significant progress in that area, and we were also, of course, ecstatic about Henry winning a gold medal in Beijing in the men's freestyle. And it's a continuing challenge because the international scene is very competitive, particularly with the Russians and the Cubans and others. So I follow it a lot more closely than I used to because I was primarily focused on high school and college wrestling, folk style wrestling, as you would call it.
So your thoughts about being honored with the award here at the Hall of Fame and spending time with some of the greats that are here this week?
Well, I'm absolutely in awe of all these great wrestlers and coaches that are involved in the sport, and I think it's really important that the Hall is the torchbearer and the holder of the flame, so to speak, for the sport. I think it's important to honor these people. I myself am very flattered to receive this Order of Merit award, especially following Richard Small, one of my heroes, who has done so much for the sport, and many others in that category, to say nothing of the distinguished members, wrestlers and coaches.
Well, we appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you so much, Arno.
Thanks, Gary.